Well, hello. Good morning. I say morning. I don't know when you're going to watch this. We're recording it late morning, Sunday, July 21st. I can tell you right now, for the few of you that do tune in and watch them, I would recommend you get a pencil and a piece of paper for this one. Now, I'm going to try to explain it, and I'm going to try to explain it in an understandable way. I'm still working on the paper that I sent out yesterday. It's not as clear as it needs to be, but this is such an important thing. You don't hear about it from our political candidates. And next week, I caution you, we're going to have an article, and the topic is going to be lettuce head versus Napoleon, our two political candidates. That's lettuce head versus uh, Napoleon. So I encourage you to tune in next week. It's going to be a very interesting discussion. And the reason I'm talking in those terms about them is I'm actually mad with both of them because I think there are three huge problems that are much larger than anything you hear coming out of their mouths that they're not addressing. And I want to use the discussion of lettuce head and Napoleon to get to those problems. So I'm sort of using them to get to the main problems that face us going forward, uh, particularly from 225 forward, if we're going to survive as a nation. So that's the reason. Next week, lettuce head versus Napoleon. Be sure you stay tuned. Today, today we're going to talk about the Federal Reserve. We've talked about them before, and I'm going to start by, if you notice my hat says Jekyll Island. It's off the coast of Georgia, beautiful little island. I've been there, but the history of it is a bit tainted and covered in secrecy. And so to get to the Federal Reserve, we're going to go back to the creation of the Federal Reserve. And I believe it was around September 10th, 1910, when Warburg and six other bankers, actually, one of them was a politician, five other bankers, traveled by pseudonyms. They didn't want anyone to know who they were. Matter of fact, Warburg pretended to be a duck hunter. He got a rifle, and he never used a rifle. And uh, and they all met in Jekyll Island in a conference room. Now, why did six top bankers and one politician meet at Jekyll Island on September 10th, 1910, anonymously? They didn't want anybody to know they were going there. Why did six guys and a politician representing more than 50% of all the money in the world meet at Jekyll Island? Well, I'm going to tell you why. They had a plan. They were going to form the Federal Reserve. Now, there aren't any reserves. And the word federal is a little tricky too. Is it federal? I don't know. So, so they did meet. And as a result of that, the Congress voted in the 1913 Act. It was directly from the minutes and notes at that secretive 1910 meeting. And we didn't learn about it till Warburg's son disclosed it some 30 years later. We didn't even know about it. Okay, so Jekyll Island, an appropriately named place, had a conference room in their main little hotel there, and that's where the meetings took place. And very interesting reading about Jekyll Island. Now, the self-licking ice cream cone predates Jekyll Island. Oh my gosh. What do we mean by a self-licking ice cream cone? When you look at the empires that have governed for periods of time, all the way back to societies forming and empires forming, back to the ancient Greeks, the Macedonians, a number of them, up to the Byzantines, Mehmet and the Ottomans. When you look at these empires and you listen to historians and philosophers talk about them and the wisdom they let out, they all had uh, sort of dramatic and violent declines. And the declines, although it might have taken years and years for an empire to develop, the decline didn't take too long at all. And there's been many people commenting today that we're in the later stages of our empire, and there are certain signs that I feel that are not being paid attention to, and we're going to talk about them more next week. But I think it's essential to understand the main symptom that's occurring that I think recurred all the way back to the Carthaginians, all the way back to the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Ottoman Empire. All these empires had something in common. And, and guess what? I've named it, for lack of a better name, and actually I took the name from my college roommate who had mentioned it about 20 years ago. I call it the self-licking ice cream cone. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm giving you time. Have you gotten a paper and a pencil? I think you ought to write some of this down, particularly the viewers who aren't familiar with economics. No matter if you're a lawyer or whatever you might be, I think you ought to get this down because I'm going to try to make it real simple. Okay, societies all the way back to the Romans and prior to the Romans, in order to stay in power, collected taxes. And over time, as they evolved into empires, there were many people in the empire, sort of that controlled the empire. They were sort of the earliest vestiges of a bureaucrat, if you will. And they became more entrenched and more powerful as time went on. But they were always tax dependent until they found an easier way. Now, what do I mean an easier way? Well, nobody likes to pay taxes. I mean, the Romans used to send guys out with spears to collect them from the feudal estates. And, the feudal estates toward the end of the Roman Empire wasn't able to pay them, laid off a lot of people in the feudal estate because they didn't have the money to pay the tax. They went to the inner city and started, and Rome had to just start the dole. They would give them bread in the inner cities, and until that stopped. And of course, the Roman Empire was in full decline at that time. And the thing Rome did, the thing that I see almost all the empires did that preceded their decline, is they debased their currency, devalued their currency. Well, what do I mean, devalued their currency? What does that mean? Well, when you have a fiat currency out there and you're an empire, your currency is pretty much dominant when you're one of the world's leading empires. It has a value to it. Whether it's in gold coins like the Byzantine Empire, or silver, or just purely fiat currency, in other words, pieces of paper like we have today, it pretty much is dominant for the empire. Their currency is pretty much dominant, and it's used much broadly than just in the empire. Now, so if you have to collect taxes and you have this sort of entrenched bureaucracy, people running the empire, so to speak, that are working for the dictator, the leader, the democratic president, whatever you want to call them, this entrenched bureaucracy seems to have a tendency to grow. And it's not, if you go to private sector, there's a natural thing that occurs when there's inefficiencies or bad judgments, or they go out of business, they disappear. Well, a bureaucracy has no test to the market. It's a part of government and it just stays put. So a bureaucracy, they have to eat, they have to pay their bills, they need money. So eventually, in every empire I've looked at, the expense of this sort of institutionalized bureaucratic government causes the leaders to seek other ways to get money, because it's very hard to take a spear and go door to door as the Romans did and try to collect taxes. Okay, it's a hard way, and there's a lot of resistance among citizens in every country to paying taxes. So, what are your other options? We need more money than we're getting. This is all we got this year in tax. What are we gonna? How are we gonna make it up? Well, governments borrow money. Okay, is there anything else they can do? Well, aha, yes, there is. Why? How clever can you be? We can print more or make more currency. We control it. We're the government, for God's sakes. We control the currency. We can just issue more currency. Aha. So, well, what does that mean? If you go back far enough, how do you issue more currency or spend less time or assets on the currency you have? Well, for a long period of time, people would file down the edges of their precious metal coins, so the coins would shrink. But because they had a value, even though they were shrinking, guess what? The exchange value would shrink. Aha! Inflation. In other words, they would get more coins by essentially shaving down the edges and having the smaller coin, and they would use the excess to make more coins. Or, as the Byzantine Empire did, after over 800 years with one gold coin, beautiful gold coin. They were so dominant. Oh my goodness. I think it was Constantine the Eighth. One of the Constantines, got up the idea, let's put some lead in. We can make more gold coins if we put 20% lead in with the gold, can't we? Oh my gosh, yes. They started debasing. We call it debasement of your currency. The currency is actually a little bit different. It's worth a little less, and we make a lot more of them and circulate them, put them out there. That's money the government will get when we issue that currency. All right. Well, today there's more sophisticated ways to debase the currency. Since the guys at Jekyll Island formed the Federal Reserve, uh, uh, and for many years we were somewhat tied to the gold standard. That's no longer the case. So what we do now is the Federal Reserve Bank, if it wants to put more money out there to pay, well, for our huge debt, uh, all it has to do is enter a number, let's say 1 billion. It enters a computer number of 1 billion to a Federal Reserve Bank, which in turn buys, let's say, government bonds with that $1 billion. All right, well, those government bonds go to what's called the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, and they sit there. They have a time limit, and they do eventually expire, and the people holding them need to get their money back. That's all correct. But the point is that billion that was just a number entered on a computer that appeared at a Federal Reserve Bank has now become $1 billion because he had paid for those government bonds. Aha, called printing money, right out of nowhere, out of thin air. That $1 billion appeared in a Federal Reserve Bank, and those bonds went from ownership in a number of banks to the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. Now, they do the same thing with mortgage-backed securities up until recently. They've stopped doing it with them, and you can see what's happened to the housing market, and the interest rate shot up to 7. We'll talk about that in a bit. So basically, all you have to do, it's as simple as hitting your computer and typing in $1 billion, any number you want, 10 billion, 5 billion, whatever, and it instantly becomes money. And the counter trade is you use that new money to buy bonds in the open market, and those people get that money. Now, there was a guy that came along, I call him Ben Bernanke, Benedict Bernanke for short. I think he set the chorus that allowed the last 3 presidents of America to put us, pathetically in debt. And the reason I say that is he had studied in his PhD the Great Depression, and he was convinced that had they printed money during the Great Depression at the early stage, back in 29, they would have mitigated the need to have had a depression. The thing is, he was wrong. Okay, I hate to say that. Ben Bernanke was wrong. Surprise. The printing of money wouldn't have done anything that he conjectured it would. But they used to call him Helicopter Ben. When he got into office, the Federal Reserve balance sheet in 2008 was about $800 billion. Okay, that means that $800 billion of new money had been printed over the years, going back to George Washington, for God's sake, through the Bush administration. When he got into office, he ran the balance sheet up to over 4 trillion. And subsequently, the balance sheet was run up by his 2 students, Janet Wawa and Mr. Powell, the suit of clothes, the slick talking lawyer, the one we have now, are both students of Ben Bernanke. They're no more than that. Matter of fact, I have a friend who knows somebody close to Powell that says for the longest time he was on the phone with Janet Wawa and Benedict Bernanke weekly, getting guidance. Now, what kind of guidance would they have been giving him? Well, Mr. Powell went through a couple dramatic periods of printing. He had a problem in 2016, 17, 18. He printed money like a banshee. And then he had the COVID problem. He printed money like a banshee in 2021 and 2022. Okay. I mean, if you want an analogy, Mr. Powell literally ran over the economy with a mag truck, ran it over. And what he's been doing monthly is giving us updates on the economy's improvement while it sits in critical care. And I say that somewhat facetiously, but I also want people to understand that contextual view because it's true. Never in any society has printed money done anything except cause a temporary feeling of wealth and well-being. And the consequence over time has always been the same: debasement, lowering the value of the currency, i.e., inflation. The prices of goods go up. Why? Because your money is worth less. That's the reason. So when you listen to all these economists talk about shortages here and shortages there, well, there are some shortages here and there, but that's not the reason everything went up, because everything wasn't in shortage and everything went up. It might have had an effect on some things and prevented them from going up that much. But to describe the aftermath of the greatest printing binge in my lifetime, and I'm not a young guy, I'm 75 years old, for God's sakes. In my lifetime, to describe the greatest printing binge of money in terms of saying it's due to shortages that caused it, and that's what caused prices to go up, is it's not correct. Believe me. So, okay, now we understand how money's printed. That it's just an entry on a computer at the Federal Reserve Bank, say in New York, to the member banks, and that number appears in money and can be exchanged for bonds in the market, and it puts liquidity in the market and takes the bonds out of the market, and they end up on the Federal Reserve balance sheet. That's how they print. So they've ran the money supply. When Benedict got into office in 08, it was 800 billion. They've run it up to almost a peak of $8.9 trillion. I think in March of 22, that's when it peaked. And then Powell goes, uh-oh, what have I done? Inflation rate hits 9%. So he starts to let bonds mature in excess of the new money they print. Okay. So the balance sheet starts to go down. So the balance sheet goes down from March of 22 to March of 23, from 8.9 to I think 8.4, somewhere in those general areas, $1 trillion. Okay. And then we had a little bank problem, right? So it took him a year to get the balance sheet down roughly $600 billion. Oh, and he did say, I'm going to take it down more than $1 trillion. Of course, what he didn't say is I added almost $5 trillion before. Why did you add that $5 trillion, Mr. Powell? Really? Okay. So immediately when the banking crisis, so-called banking crisis occurred, and it was somewhat of a crisis, created by the Fed, incidentally, created by their past actions. And when it did occur, he stuck back in about 2/3 of the money in a week. So what took him a year to get down, he put back in a week. So basically, that's their gimmick. They have the ability to print money and take money out of the system, and it has very bad implications going forward. I've always believed that it should never, the amount of money put into the system should never exceed on an annual basis the real growth rate of the economy. In other words, real growth rate, the growth rate after inflation, whatever the growth rate was, you have to subtract inflation. So if the real growth rate is 1%, the amount of money put in the system should only be 1%, not near 30%, which is what Powell did. Okay. I don't know. We've never had a period like that. Now, so basically, here we are. Now, today, the amount of money in the system is somewhere around 7.23 trillion on the Fed balance sheet. Now, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And we go back to Clever Ben. Clever Ben realized if he was going to print all the money that he had planned to print, he would need to keep it out of the economic system. Because if you're going to, at the time, he was also holding rates artificially low. He was holding rates down at ridiculously low levels, okay, to stimulate the economy, to cause people to what? To borrow money. And at that time, many of our largest bankers bought a lot of government bonds, which are considered safe. That's a good question. How long will that be the case? how long will our U.S. government bonds be considered safe? You know, are they going to have an expiration date? I think that's a legitimate worry, particularly in what we're seeing today. And to not be concerned about it is concerning, and to not be talking about it. You know, particularly since we're increasing the debt at a rate of near $1 trillion every 110 days. $1 trillion every 110 days. Last month, June, the interest on the debt, 1 month, hit $120 billion. $120 billion. No, that's astronomical. That suggests way over $1 trillion just paying interest on the debt, which pressures everything, particularly the so-called entitlements part, which you could talk about at another time. But to say that the debt is out of control is not an overstatement. Our U.S. debt is out of control. And when we get to talking about next week, let us head Napoleon, one of the reasons is to give me a platform, an entry point to talk about the debt. Why? Because neither one of them are concerned. Now, how can you not be concerned if the debt is out of control? Okay, it's a good question. Are they so obsessed with promising gifts to people with public funds to not want to talk about the debt? It appears that way. And if so, what does that bode for the future? We're going to talk a lot more about that next week, but this week we're sticking with self-licking ice cream cone. Now, I want to touch on something else too. Modern monetary theory. Okay. Now, the progressive wing of the liberals. Now, you know what the difference is between a liberal and a progressive, right? Well, I'm going to tell you. A liberal has an honest heart, loves America, and wants to see change. A progressive hates America. They hate the country. That's the difference. So the progressive wing, and now that's Bernie and a small group of people in my mind, now you may not feel he belongs there. Elizabeth Warren, a few of them, they don't like the country. Kamala can't stop giggling about it. They clearly in their lives, in their actions, don't like America. They're not liberals. Now Biden's a different case. He's a liberal. The thing I want to say about shit, I just lost my train of thought talking too much about the formation of the debt and modern monetary theory is the Liberal Party has not only bought into MMT, our federal government has bought into it. Everything I just explained is right out of MMT handbook. Okay. Now trying to mop up after the disaster is almost laughable. Powell is a very smooth talking guy, much like in some respects Biden is in some respects, on a different level, of course. But he's not fooling me. Okay, he's not fooling me. I mean, he has practiced MMT, modern monetary theory. Now, the thing I want to tell you is it's not modern. Okay, it's just not modern. Now, I've done some research on it. When you go back in 1919 in Germany, when Friedrich Ebert, a socialist Democrat, became the Chancellor of Germany, taking over for Kaiser Wilhelm II, he bought into something that an economist was selling, George Frederick Knapp, called the Chartist School of Economics. Now, the Chartist School of Economics said you can print as much money as you want, no problem. And if inflation comes up, just increase the tax rate. I've never in anything I'm aware of, and I'm certainly not, I wouldn't consider, I certainly don't have an awareness of everything, but everything I've ever encountered, I've never seen such a cockamamie, moronic theory. Well, now at the time, 1919, you got to consider Germany had just lost World War I, and the Allies were demanding debt reparations out of Germany. So Germans are very clever, right? The Germans aren't stupid. So here's this Charless guy, Knapp, saying we can print whatever we want, right? Okay, guys, let's print some German marks, exchange them uh, for other European currencies, and pay them back in their own currency. Aha! And that way we'll get them off our back. We won't owe them anything. Okay. The printing presses started rolling in Germany under MMT, modern monetary theory. It's not modern. Frederick Knapp invented it and he tried it out. How did it end up? Well, it ended up in an inflation that caused the German mark to go from 4.1 to the dollar to 7,000 marks for a dollar by 1923. Almost 5 years later, 7,000 marks for a dollar. I mean, Germans were being paid at lunchtime to go out and spend the money before the end of the day because prices were going up so fast. You can thank MMT, modern monetary theory. And nobody wants that. He's the man that formed it. He's the man that formulated it. And my God, the Germans bought into it hook, line, and sinker. And it ended up in a very severe depression and with Hitler. So MMT has a very shoddy record when it's being practiced. So don't be fooled by it. And truly, every society that becomes more and more reliant on debasement of currency to pay their bureaucracies, their government employees, because when an empire reaches its zenith, its top, it has a lot of workers underneath it, and they all need salaries. They're usually bright people. They're sharp people, and that's what the challenge is, because you have an economy that always has a variable income. The incomes go up and down, up and down, and then you have government debt that has a constant demand on that economy, and you have to contain it. And when you lose control of it, it's not pretty, because as you weaken, the empire weakens, and as the empire weakens, it's just not a pretty thing. So basically, I want to touch on one other thing, because we're not going to come back to this. Putting the 8 trillion, currently 7 point almost 3 trillion into the system is not the end, is not what causes inflation. And Ben Bernanke was very clever about that. He set up accounts with the Federal Reserve, okay, which still exist, to cause the banks that received the money, remember, they got the bonds, the Federal Reserve got the bonds, the banks got the money, to want to put the money back at the Federal Reserve and keep it what? Keep it out of the system. Because it's when money gets in the system with an artificially low interest rate was, to some big borrowers, was less than 2%, if you can believe it, guess what? The loan demand goes straight up. People are borrowing a ton of money, okay, including banks. They're investing in a ton of government bonds at artificially low interest rates, which is a problem they face today, even though Janet Wawat cleverly navigated around it by allowing them to do shouty accounting and not disclose that they're submerged. Many banks today have negative values, even though the commentators on TV talk about huge, gigantic book values. because they take the assets they bought at maturity and they don't take them at the market value at the time. But the but when that billion that we talked about enters the system and is not put back at the Federal Reserve, okay, and enters the system, think about where it goes. So you have $1 billion new coming into the system. Well, guess what? Borrowers come up and borrow it. Well, what do they do after they borrow? Well, they put it back in another bank. So Bank A gets the money, and let's say theoretically it all ends up in Bank B. Well, what does Bank B do? Well, they relend that same $1 billion, except the law requires them to, they call it a reserve requirement. The law requires them to hang on to, let's say, 5 to 10%. Let's say they only lend 90% of it, 900 million. It goes back into Bank C. And Bank C does what? Well, they lend it out too. Another 10% charge, leaving 810 million they lend out. So here you have the same money, $1 billion entering the system, relent 900 million entering the system, relent 81 million entering the system. You have a total of 2.71 billion, and it goes on and on, created of new money. And that is what causes inflation. But clever Ben said, well, I'm going to put new money in the system and I'm going to have them keep it with us. Well, how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to pay them more interest than the regular community gives them, and I'm going to make it a certainty so we know they're going to keep it with us. Why are they going to risk a charge of interest to a bank, to a commercial customer that could fail if they've got it for certain from us? And that's exactly what he did. And the repercussions of that are scary to me. They're scary to me because they take decision making away from the banking system. They take a lot of power away from the banking system. The banks used to borrow at the discount window. And the discount window was the community of other banks. Because oftentimes a bank might be short that night. Somebody might have taken too much cash out or whatever. And they'd go to the discount window and they'd borrow. And the discount rate is always a very low rate. And they would borrow for a very short period of time. But they would borrow from another bank, not the government. Okay. Now, that other bank was familiar with the borrowing bank. They wouldn't just randomly lend. They would take a big sniff at their balance sheet, make sure they were in good standing. So every time a discount window loan occurred, every time the bank lending was comfortable that the bank borrowing was able to pay it back. Not anymore, not with the federal government. With the federal government, if you're a chartered bank, you can do it all you want. You can borrow all you want within limits, but you're never checked. Okay. You don't have that due diligence that private banks use. So the federal government is taking on some level of risk that nobody knows what it is because nobody's looking at it in that market. And they're taking a huge chunk of private banking decision making and federalizing it. Now, is there any wonder Ben Bernanke got the Nobel Prize? Well, you know who gives out the Nobel Prize in economics? A bunch of central bankers, for God's sake. So is there any reason he got it? But he set a new direction for our Federal Reserve, and frankly, it's scaring the bejesus out of me. And that's why we're here today. That's why we've undergone 3 presidents. Obama, who incidentally more than doubled the national debt, added 9 trillion. I mean, if you go from George Washington through Bush, the national debt was barely $9 trillion. That's over 200 years of presidents. Well, Obama doubled it and more, adding 9 trillion. And Ben Bernanke facilitated it by printing and having artificially low interest rates. Then Mr. Trump, who we're going to call Napoleon next week, The guy that had 6 personal bankruptcies. Can you believe it? I mean, I've been in business all my life. One bankruptcy is a terrible thing. You try to avoid it, and I've had tough times where I've had to try. You have obligations, you have to pay them back. He had 6 bankruptcies, Donald Trump, and you've got, and he's going to manage us out of this. Good luck with that. And then you had Ben cleverly providing money for him too. Okay, so Trump takes the 9 trillion that Obama did and runs up almost 7.8 trillion in debt in just 4 years. With Obama, it took 8 years. Trump does it in 4. Okay, are you with me? Then we get Biden. Okay, oh my God. I mean, Biden never even had a paper route in his life. He's done nothing in the private sector. He's clueless. Biden is the biggest gift giver I've ever seen in my life. The problem is it's with other people's money. It's with the government's money. Biden to date has just passed 8 trillion. He's beaten Trump. It looks like Trump and Biden together are going to log in 16 trillion on top of Obama's 9. Okay. That's more than 25 trillion in debt, 25 trillion in debt in 16 years. Okay. And the accumulation of debt is every 90 to 100 days. And is there any wonder that the BRIC countries and the BRIC plus countries and numerous other countries are trying to avoid trading in the dollar? No, I would avoid it too. I mean, the self-licking ice cream cone has taken a disastrous toll on America. And it's always tempting for political leaders. They always succumb to it. A favorite period of time for me was watching Ben Bernanke appear before countless Congresses for 6 or 7 years and scold them for spending. Now, here's a guy that's holding the rates down artificially low, okay, and printing money. And then that's like getting a bunch of 6-year-olds and giving them their favorite chocolate cakes and putting them on the table and then scolding them for eating it. I mean, if you're going to create an environment where money is almost costless and then scold the people for taking it, which is what the government did. The government went crazy with spending in the last 16 years. Crazy. And now the question is, what can we do about it? Neither one of our presidential candidates is even talking about it. They're not talking about it. Yet I tell you, when every empire goes in history, it doesn't go slowly. It goes very quickly. It takes years and years to build up. But when it goes quick. And we better have answers from the 2 candidates for president of America, what they're going to do about the debt. Because it's not going to be quiet after this year, as soon as the election's up. And it's going to be in our face. And right now, all I see is a reliance on the self-licking ice cream cone, and a scary reliance. Every time there's a hiccup in the economy, there's excessive printing and subsequent inflation. And we should ask Javier down in Argentina how he's doing. The Argentine peso, and we'll throw this out there too, the Argentine peso was linked to the dollar in 2001, 2002. And to the degree that right about 1 peso for $1. And Argentina was the 4th richest country in the world. It has tremendous natural resources. It has a European population and tremendously wealthy country until it got into bad politics. Okay. When they broke the link with the dollar, guess what happened to the Argentine currency? Well, the Argentine currency today, after 22 years, is the peso's worth less than a penny, less than 1 penny. And this is 22 years of what? They were printing money to make their government payroll, printing money weekly to make their government payroll. And now Javier's got to figure a way out of that mess. And good luck with that. But our leadership is going right down the same rabbit hole at a horrific pace. And it's only a matter of time. And I feel in 2025, we're going to see significant signs of issues with that. And I can't blame any BRIC country for not wanting to trade in dollars. Now, that doesn't explain other hostilities and aggressions against us, but at all. But I can't help but feel that the self-licking ice cream cone is going to come into play again shortly. Because when the Federal Reserve only has essentially one tool, when you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And that's the mentality. And Powell, I mean, he's not accountable for what he did either. No more accountable than accountability in government today is almost laughable. Accountability in many aspects of our society is almost laughable. There have to be consequences for bad decisions. And the Federal Reserve has way off its traditional reservation. And I only hope people are aware of the fragility of our future in light of the self-licking ice cream cone. Now, that said, I've been talking a pretty long period right now, and I'm just about to shut this down. I hope you viewed us. I hope you're going to watch our discussion next week of Lettuce Head and Napoleon. Again, I'm just using that context as a method to access problems and discuss the problems that neither one of them are dealing with. And they're going to be right in our face after election. So I hope you tune in and watch us, Sunshine and Transparency. Next Sunday, we'll be out with another podcast and another paper. When you get a chance, although I'm making some corrections in the paper, hopefully they'll all be posted today on our website, odysseyinvestments.info. Odysseyinvestments.info. Feel free to go to it if you want to access the papers. Against the Consensus, depress it. The paper will be number 36. I said I'm going to do 100 of these and see if they catch on. If they don't, I'm closing down shop. I'm too old to be doing this kind of stuff. But I'm going to throw the first 100 out there. We're going to be at 37 next week. Lettuce Head versus Napoleon. Please stay tuned. Have a blessed week, and thank you for watching. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week. And bye-bye.